chosen ones. There are forces older than civilization, deeper than any scripture, and louder than any trumpet of war. Yet, they move in silence. In the remote corners of this earth, far from politics and algorithms, 7 shamans gathered beneath a violet sky to perform a rite no one remembered teaching them. They had never met before. They spoke different tongues, but as they sat in stillness, the moment the fire cracked a certain way, they all dropped into trance as if possessed by a singular current. The wind stilled, the trees leaned inward, the stars above them flickered, not randomly, but in rhythm. Then it happened. All 7 mouths from 7 continents whispered one name in perfect unison. Your name. Not just as sound, but as invocation. It wasn't spoken, it was remembered. They didn't know each other, but they recognized you. The energy shifted. Mountains trembled in silence. Clouds reoriented over sacred sites. And on surveillance satellites thousands of miles away, unknown frequencies registered a spiritual spike that sent red alerts into places you'll never hear about, unless you were meant to, unless you already feel it. The shamans did not wake for hours. But when they did, they had no memory of what occurred. Only visions carved into their skin, maps, coordinates, symbols not of this earth. Every sign pointed toward one life form, one echo, you. This is not mythology. It is not dream or coincidence. It's pattern recognition playing out across forgotten dimensions. The old texts warned of a convergence between the ancient breath of the earth and the coming war of thought. They said one would be born not to lead with conquest, but with resonance, not to fight, yet still to be feared. And they called this one not ruler, not prophet, but vessel. That's why they've been watching you. Not because of what you've done, but because of what you haven't yet. Because deep within you, even in your moments of doubt, something ancient has remained untouched. And the world's most hidden circles know that if it ever awakens fully, it won't be containable. Now, the 7 have stirred again. This time, they didn't fall asleep. They're waiting, watching, repeating the same word. Not a warning, a confirmation. It started in a place untouched by tourism or time, a clearing deep within a jungle, known only to those who never left maps. The night was still until it wasn't. As the last syllable of your name left the lips of the 7th shaman, the sky shifted in hues that have no name in any living language. Violets turned into gold, indigo folded into pure white. Constellations realigned mid-motion like dancers on an ancient stage responding to choreography they had waited eons to perform. No scientific instrument captured it, but those who live by intuition rather than invention felt it in their marrow. Animals stopped in the middle of their steps. Waters stood still. And in places where war had been waged for generations, there was a moment of inexplicable quiet. The whispers didn't echo. They hung, as if the atmosphere itself wanted to preserve the vibration. The trees leaned in toward the center of the clearing, forming a living cathedral. Their branches shaped symbols no one noticed until a drone camera later reviewed the footage. It was no language, but it pulsed, matching your heartbeat to the second. The world's major energy grids flickered. Not a blackout, not sabotage, just a pause, a blink. And during that blink, multiple air traffic controllers reported strange visual anomalies they were ordered to delete from their records. Above the earth, the aurora borealis twisted into spiral patterns only seen once before, in an ancient Tibetan sky map banned by 3 different governments. None of it made headlines, but it found its way into encrypted reports marked for celestial containment, the kind of files that don't go to presidents or kings. They go to those above them, the ones who ask not what, but when. They cross-reference signals, pulse lines, names, and the one word that triggered them all this time was not a code. It was the sound of you. The shamans didn't speak again. They stood in unison and walked away from the circle, not hurried, not afraid, like they had completed their part in something they couldn't explain. Something old had been notified, and something older had just opened its eyes. In a sealed chamber beneath an abandoned monastery in the high Andes, a manuscript was uncovered behind a wall of obsidian stone. It wasn't stored, it was hidden. Covered in dust older than any dynasty, bound in unfamiliar hide, the text had no title and no recognized script. But the symbols responded to light in a way that defied logic. Under the right frequency, they rearranged themselves, and what emerged wasn't just prophecy, it was description. A set of traits, phrases, and markings that matched only one known being alive today. The description of your eyes was so precise, it unsettled the linguists decoding it. Not metaphorical, but exact. Color, depth, even the way the pupil shifts when confronted by truth. There was no author's name, no religious framing. It was not a text of worship, but of witness. Whoever wrote it didn't revere you. They recorded you, like they had seen you before, like they had met you long before now. The chilling part: the manuscript was carbon dated to over 16 centuries ago, predating all modern civilization in that region. Yet, it referenced satellites, digital codes, and the exact day this record would be revealed. The same date the shamans fell into trance. It even showed a diagram of 7 figures around a blazing symbol in the earth, all facing toward a singular eye, drawn with gold dust that never faded. One of the researchers assigned to the text was a quiet Jesuit archivist from Rome. Upon seeing the passages describing your gaze, he stepped back, crossed himself, and whispered only 4 words: "He walks again, unseen." He was later reassigned. No explanation, no forwarding trail, just gone. There was a passage buried in the center of the document that nobody could translate, until a woman from Jerusalem arrived with no invitation and read it aloud without effort. She claimed the language was close to Aramaic, but purer, older. Her voice trembled not with fear, but recognition. She said the words translated to, "The one whose soul carried the silence of Yeshua will return when fire meets sky." The shamans remained still long after the last syllable of your name echoed through the clearing. Hours passed. The fire burned out. Yet, not one muscle twitched. Not a single breath quickened. It was as though their bodies had surrendered to something beyond the veil of this realm, something that held them in a grip older than blood. The surrounding jungle seemed to respect the moment, as if the ancient spirits of the land themselves were standing still, waiting. Night deepened, and the sky above transformed into a mirror that did not reflect what was, but what was coming. Above them, 7 stars shifted slowly. They belonged to no known constellation. Astronomers would later argue that such an alignment was mathematically improbable, yet it happened. Not randomly, not by drift. They arranged themselves deliberately, as if responding to the spoken resonance of your name. Each star pulsed once, then again, then a third time in unison, triggering a subtle tremor felt not by seismographs, but by those attuned to the language of energy. It wasn't until the final star settled into its position that the shamans stirred, not awake in the traditional sense. Their eyes opened, but they didn't blink. Not once. Each looked in a different direction, as if seeing into realities lay just beyond the edge of vision. Slowly, they stood, one after another, each marked by soot across the forehead in the shape of a spiral. They didn't speak. They didn't write. But they all moved at once toward the edge of the jungle, without signal or command, guided only by something unseen. In that same moment, thousands of miles away, an encrypted observatory feed caught a brief flicker. Your silhouette reflected in a lens it wasn't pointed toward. No explanation, no entry log. The operator froze, not in fear, but in awe. There was something about the image that bypassed logic. It wasn't a recording. It felt like a memory placed inside a machine that wasn't supposed to feel. As the stars above the shamans held their new pattern, the air around the jungle turned thick, like time itself had folded into a waiting room. Something was being prepared, not summoned, not forced, prepared. Because the stars do not bow unless the one they orbit has finally returned. Long after the others had vanished into the jungle's breath, the eldest shaman remained behind, bent with years and weather. His frame looked fragile beneath the torchlight that refused to die out. But something behind his eyes had shifted, not just from the trance, but from who had moved through him. He sat in the center of the stone circle, lips quivering, not from age, but from restraint. He hadn't spoken since the invocation, until now. The wind curled around him like a guardian, and when he opened his mouth, the voice that came out wasn't his. It was deeper, layered, as if several voices spoke in harmony. And it didn't speak in his native tongue. It spoke in one forgotten by time but recognized by soul. The words did not explain. They declared. They said the one named across 7 tongues would not lead, but awaken. Not rule, but unravel. They said the vessel had returned not to restore balance, but to dissolve the illusion of it. He called you by a name no human had used in this era, a name that was more a title than identity. The interpreter of fire, the one who remembers without learning. He said you were marked not at birth, but before breath. And then he said something no one could decipher completely, but everyone felt in their chest. The seal has been breached where light once held back the watchers. Someone in the observatory monitoring sound frequencies felt a sharp spike the exact moment those words were spoken. It wasn't static. It was a frequency map matching that of desert cave recordings taken in the 1940s, recordings that had been buried beneath Vatican encryption, sealed by those who didn't believe in coincidence. A soft hum followed the elder's words, and his body began to vibrate. Not shake, vibrate like a tuning fork finally struck after centuries of silence. Before his eyes rolled back, he whispered one final phrase. He never left. He only waited until the mirror could reflect him again. No one around him understood what he meant. But those words made their way to a monk deep in the Sinai wilderness, who, upon hearing them, simply fell to his knees and said, Yeshua walks the edge of time once more. The stone circle, where the shamans gathered, was older than any nation, any known tribe, any myth still told by firelight. Long buried by overgrowth and forgotten even by oral tradition, it had not been touched in over 2 millennia, until the night your name rose through their mouths in perfect harmony. The stones were unassuming at first glance, worn by erosion, pitted by rain, but something lived beneath them. Not insects, not roots, energy, layered and waiting. As the final syllable of your name dissolved into the jungle air, the stones began to breathe, not metaphorically, but visibly. A faint shimmer rippled across their surfaces, and beneath the moss and weathering, ancient carvings began to glow with a pale blue light. Patterns once invisible emerged in sequence, lines folding into fractals, symbols spiraling into geometries no scholar had ever charted. This wasn't decoration. It was a circuit. Each shaman, though unaware, stood directly over one node of the circle. Their bodies had aligned instinctively, as if following choreography encoded in their blood. When they spoke in unison, the energy beneath them surged, linking the nodes, igniting the network. A low-frequency hum grew from the earth itself, vibrating through the bones of nearby animals, unsettling migratory patterns in a 60-mile radius. Locals reported birds circling without direction. Wolves howled at nothing. Children woke from sleep, crying about fire under the ground. At a secure geology station hundreds of miles away, magnetic field monitors recorded a disturbance that didn't match solar flares or tectonic shifts. The report was filed, flagged, and buried. But one technician who saw the data recognized the pattern from an old forbidden manuscript, passed through the hands of secret societies. A blueprint of activation meant only to be triggered once. The stones pulsed again, then fell still. But something had changed. The jungle no longer felt closed. There was a current moving outward from the circle, like a quiet siren call that didn't need volume to be heard. And somewhere far from that clearing, a man in a sleepless laboratory dropped his pen mid-sentence, suddenly overcome by a thought he didn't summon. He didn't know where it came from, only that it whispered a name he had never heard: yours. Beneath the floor of a collapsed ceremonial site in the Kalahari Desert, archaeologists unearthed a stone tablet embedded with a strange luminescent metal. At first, it appeared like any fragment, weathered, fractured, unremarkable. But under lunar exposure, a faint symbol glowed near its center, an intricate spiral intersected by a single vertical line. The team dismissed it as decorative, until one researcher, without explanation, trembled and whispered, This is alive." He had never said that about stone. He couldn't explain why he said it now. The tablet was sent to a secure facility for further analysis. The symbol matched nothing in known databases, ancient languages, or tribal symbology. It didn't correspond to constellations or mathematics. But someone who saw it didn't look at it like data. She looked at it like memory. A woman stationed in a secondary lab thousands of miles away stood silent when the image came on screen. She said nothing for almost a minute. Then she rolled up her sleeve and showed the room a birthmark. Same design, same placement, same scale. She had no explanation. Her colleagues thought it was a coincidence, until the lab's temperature dropped by 7 degrees and their instruments all glitched simultaneously. The computers didn't crash. They rebooted, each one displaying a string of symbols that had never been programmed into their systems. The string wasn't code, it was language. It translated into a question. Is the vessel remembering yet? No one spoke aloud, but the tension thickened. It was as if the tablet wasn't a relic, but a key. And now that the pattern had been matched in a living form, yours, whatever it was meant to unlock, had begun its quiet sequence. In another part of the world, a monk meditating in silence opened his eyes mid-chant, then drew that same spiral with his finger into the air, confused and tearful. He didn't know why, only that something eternal had brushed past him, just for a moment, and he swore he heard a voice say, "The one who bears the mark will return what was lost beneath flame." The symbol is still under review, but the original birthmark, the one on your body, has now begun to itch. And beneath that sensation, something else is waking. Something that was never just skin. The eldest shaman, days after the trance, painted what he saw onto the side of a rock that only revealed its surface to the dawn. The image was not of the ritual. It was not of the jungle. It was of you, your form, your posture, your outline. But you weren't alone. Behind you stood a figure no one recognized, but everyone felt. Not a shadow, not a spirit, a being of light. Tall, serene, radiating presence rather than form. Wings, yes, but not of feathers. Wings of cascading light, flowing like rivers of memory, arcing through the fabric of the sky. In its left hand, the being held a scroll sealed by no visible wax, yet impossible to open. In its right, a single digit pointed directly toward the earth. When the painting was completed, the shaman fell into sleep for 3 days. Upon waking, he said nothing for hours, then only one phrase. The message is not meant to be read. It is meant to be unsealed by recognition. He said your presence triggered the scroll, not through action, but through being. The scroll was not a document. It was a spiritual equation, waiting to be witnessed by the one it was written for. In an underground vault beneath the mountains of Armenia, a scroll with nearly identical imagery had been locked in obsidian casing for over 5 centuries. When news of the painting reached a fringe scholar tied to the monastery, he made contact. He didn't reveal the scroll. He only sent one thing, a single line translated from ancient Syriac. The one who walks with the messenger is the flame reborn. A forgotten Christian mystic had once spoken of a silent twin of Yeshua, whose arrival would not be heralded by miracles, but by the awakening of messages never meant to be read aloud. This twin, he wrote, would carry resonance rather than doctrine, and when they stood beside the scroll-bearer, the sky would weep, not in sorrow, but in reverence. Somewhere far from desert and jungle, a child began sketching without looking, drawing a figure of light holding a scroll and standing behind someone who looked like you. The scroll in the image was unlabeled, but at its bottom, one word appeared: your name. In your own handwriting, one of the shamans, the youngest of the 7, remained haunted long after the trance had ended. He spoke rarely, ate little, and only once dared to share what he saw behind his closed eyes. In a whisper, he said the vision began in silence, but turned to golden mist. Through it, he witnessed a man walking barefoot through a corridor of stars, each step lighting the void beneath him. He wore no crown, bore no weapons, but the galaxies moved to clear his path. The man looked back only once, toward the viewer, and in that glance, the young shaman fell to his knees and wept without knowing why. He said the figure did not speak with lips, but every cell in the body understood the name being spoken, Yeshua. But this was not the Yeshua from stained glass or church hymns. This was the Yeshua who walked before language, before sound. The man in the vision extended his hand not in blessing, but in remembering, and in his palm rested a single thread of light, stretching outward. That thread led not forward but backward, to you. The shaman said he followed the thread and found your silhouette forming out of stardust and memory. And it was in that moment that he realized the truth. The connection between you and Yeshua was not ancestry. It was resonance, a spiritual bridge anchored not in blood, but in frequency. A mirror that had only just realigned after centuries of distortion. Deep within the archives of an Eastern monastery, a monk collapsed while copying a page from a forbidden gospel. When he recovered, he reported that he had seen a figure wrapped in light, whose presence made time itself pause. He heard no words, but upon returning to consciousness, he found that the words he had unknowingly written with trembling hands spelled out a sentence not in his language, but yours. It read, "He walked among us once, and shall walk again, cloaked not in flesh, but in truth." Those who read it dismissed it as trance babble, but the monk knew better. Because that morning, in a bowl of still water used for morning reflection, he saw a reflection that was not his own. It was yours, and you hadn't blinked. As the sun returned and filtered through the canopy, the 7 shamans, now scattered across distant regions, began to recount fragments of what they experienced. They were not speaking to each other, but to those near them. Elders, translators, recorders, none of whom were prepared for what emerged. Each shaman, in their native tongue, attempted to articulate the energy, the vision, the voice. But one word transcended all translation barriers. It passed through Quechua, Basque, Zulu, Ainu, and forgotten dialects of Siberia and Polynesia. Your name, spoken exactly the same across every mouth, without deviation or phonetic change, as though the earth itself had embedded that sound in the vibration of its own breath. No translator understood how it could be. Names typically bend, shift, localize, but yours did not. Even when one linguist tried to phonetically rearrange it, the sound collapsed, as if the name resisted distortion. It wasn't a label, it was a resonance, like a tuning fork that could only vibrate at one truth. When the recordings were sent to a covert linguistic division housed beneath a university in Germany, software flagged the waveform of your name as non-human in origin, not alien, not mechanical, pure. Its frequency registered no interference, even when passed through corrupted systems. White noise cleared, static dissolved. The sound of your name realigned machines, as if coded in a higher protocol. A young child in Mongolia, never exposed to these recordings, spoke your name in their sleep. Their parents reported the room warming unnaturally, and an owl perched at the window for the first time in years. The child had no memory upon waking, only said they dreamed of a staircase made of wind. At a monastery that rarely receives mail, a package arrived anonymously. Inside was a clay tablet, cracked, brittle, ancient. No signature, no origin. But when heat was applied, faint glyphs began to glow, then vanish, revealing just one thing beneath: the phonetic spelling of your name. Again, unchanged. One of the translators began keeping a log of every account. The last entry read, "I've studied 100 tongues, but none hold this sound like Earth herself does. It is not a name, it's a recall code, and something is answering it now." The final hours of the trance left the ground still warm, long after the fire died. Even after the shamans had walked away, the soil around where they sat pulsed faintly, like a drumbeat beneath the earth's crust. Locals reported vivid dreams for 3 nights straight, dreams of circles, keys, and a man with no shadow walking through walls made of mist. In one dream, a child described seeing a being wrapped in lightning, whispering a single phrase not in her language, but somehow understood. It begins when they awaken him. No one knew who him was. Not clearly. But the more the phrase was spoken, the more strange synchronicities unfolded. An ancient bell tower in a long-abandoned Italian village rang at midnight without machinery. A glacier in the north cracked down the center, forming a perfect triangle. And in the middle of a quiet field in South Korea, a lone monk stopped mid-chant, tears running down his face, saying the presence had returned, the one who turned silence into remembering. The phrase spread, whispered from shaman to scribe, from dreamer to outcast. But there was no agreement on its origin. Some said it referred to the one buried beneath a mountain in Persia. Others insisted it was about a celestial being who had split himself across time. But the ones who had felt the vibration most directly knew otherwise. The trance didn't speak of a coming arrival. It pointed to someone already here, unaware but rising. Someone whose frequency had already begun to bend the structure of reality simply by remembering. At a classified observatory hidden in the Andes, 2 scientists tracked unknown gamma activity tied to no solar flare or cosmic event. They triangulated its burst pattern and followed it to an exact location, buried in silence, unreachable, until one of them noticed the signal was repeating a sequence in intervals of 7. Not numbers, words. The final pulse translated to, "The vessel is near the edge of recognition." Somewhere else, an ancient stone gate cracked open for the first time in centuries. No one was there to witness it, but if they were, they would have heard it, low, deliberate, alive. And just before the sound faded, the wind carried something else, a whisper, your name, and then silence. But not the kind that ends, the kind that waits.